The year was 1968, and the American dream was not just dying, it was being dismantled in real time, broadcast in flickering black and white to a generation that had been promised a future of chrome and suburban bliss. For the 60-plus generation, 1968 is a scar that never quite faded, a year defined by the crack of a rifle in Memphis and the smell of tear gas in Chicago. In the middle of this societal collapse, there was a sound that shouldn't have existed, a roar of controlled electricity that seemed to come from a different dimension. Jimi Hendrix was the architect of that sound. To the world, he was a psychedelic messiah, a man who could command $100,000 for a single night of sonic arson. But beneath the silk scarves and the turquoise jewelry, Jimi was a man trapped in a double exile. He was a pariah in the land of his birth and a curiosity in the land of his fame. He was too black for the white world and too white for the black world. He was the voodoo child, yes, but a child without a home. Imagine, if you will, the visual dissonance of a 1968 Cadillac Fleetwood cruising down a two-lane blacktop in the heart of the Deep South, Mississippi or Alabama. This car was a $10,000 metallic beacon of success, its air conditioning humming a quiet tune of luxury against the stifling, 100-degree humidity outside. Inside the car, the air was thick with the scent of expensive French cigarettes and the laughter of two skinny English boys, Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding. To the British musicians, the American South was an exotic movie set. They were the British invasion, worshipped wherever they went. They saw the quaint diners and the authentic gas stations through the tinted glass of their success. They didn't feel the ancient, tectonic weight of the Jim Crow South. But Jimi did. Jimi sat in the back seat, wedged between a stack of Marvel comics and a battered guitar case. Despite being the highest-paid performer in the world, he was gripped by a familiar, ancestral dread. He knew that outside the Cadillac bubble, he was not a rock star. He was a target. He knew that the white fringe on his jacket looked like a bullseye to a sheriff in Alabama. The trio pulled into a roadside diner, a low-slung building with a neon sign that buzzed like a dying hornet, Joe's Southern Kitchen. The gravel crunched under the tires, a sound that Jimi would later compare to the cocking of a rifle. Mitch and Noel jumped out, stretching their legs, oblivious to the fact that the atmosphere in the parking lot had turned to ice the moment the car stopped. They walked in, their flamboyant clothes, velvet waistcoats and bell-bottoms, clashing violently with the grease-stained overalls of the other patrons. Jimi remained a few paces behind, his head down, his hands buried deep in his pockets. The silence that greeted them was not accidental. It was a biological, systemic rejection. Behind the counter stood a man with skin the texture of old luggage and eyes that hadn't seen a friendly thought in 40 years. He didn't look at Mitch or Noel. He looked at Jimi. "We don't serve your kind here, boy," the man said. For the 60-plus audience, the word boy carries a specific, jagged edge. It was the linguistic tool used to strip a man of his adulthood, his dignity, and his humanity. Mitch Mitchell, the quintessential Londoner, let out a nervous laugh. "The boy? Mate, this is Jimi Hendrix. He just played for 20,000 people in Dallas. He's the biggest star in the world." The man behind the counter didn't move. He didn't care about the Billboard charts. He didn't care about the Marshall stacks. "I don't care if he's the king of the moon," he spat. "He eats out back, or he doesn't eat at all." Jimi didn't argue. He didn't use his fame as a weapon. He simply turned around and walked back to the car. He had learned long ago that in the South, you don't fight the ocean, you just try not to drown. As he sat in the back seat, watching Mitch and Noel argue with the man through the glass, Jimi realized that his talent was a bridge that only he was allowed to cross. His friends could walk on both sides of the river, he was forever stranded in the middle. If the American South was a frontal assault on Jimi's humanity, London was a psychological ambush. The narrative we are often sold is that London saved Hendrix. In the UK, he was the voodoo child, a god among men. Eric Clapton, the reigning king of the British guitar, had been so demoralized by Jimi's playing that he famously walked off stage, trembling, unable to light a cigarette. But for Jimi, London was a different kind of exile. It was the exoticism of the other. To the British press and the high society crowds at clubs like the Bag O'Nails or the Scotch of St. James, Jimi was often treated as a specimen. They didn't call him a virtuoso, they called him a wild man. They focused on the primitive energy of his performance, the way he played with his teeth, the way he humped his amplifier, the way he burned his guitar like a pagan ritual. Jimi found himself the guest of honor at Mayfair dinner parties, surrounded by aristocrats and old money who wanted to touch the hem of his velvet coat. But the conversations always had a subtext. He was the Black Elvis, a creature of nature that had come to wake up the polite, repressed white boys of Britain. He was a novelty. In the drawing rooms of London, he was the only black person in the room 99% of the time. He felt the weight of being a performer even when he wasn't on stage. The white women who flocked to him were often chasing a stereotype of black virility rather than the shy, quiet, sci-fi obsessed man underneath. This is where the alien persona truly began. Jimi started telling reporters he was from Mars. He wrote songs like Third Stone from the Sun, where he looked at Earth as a distant, bizarre experiment that he wanted no part of. It wasn't just LSD-fueled poetry, it was a survival mechanism. If Earth, both the racist America and the condescending Britain, had no place for him, he would build a home in the stars. He wasn't trying to get high, he was trying to go home. By 1969, the peace and love era of the 60s was dying a violent death. The dream of integration was being replaced by the fierce, uncompromising fire of black nationalism. The soundtrack of the revolution was the tight, disciplined funk of James Brown, music that was black and proud. Jimi Hendrix, however, was in a precarious position. He was playing for the hippies. He was traveling with two white British guys. His music was loud, distorted, and acid-soaked. To the rising Black Power movement in Harlem, Jimi Hendrix was a traitor. They called him an Uncle Tom. They accused him of selling out his soul to the white establishment. In a desperate attempt to reconnect with his roots, Jimi agreed to play a free benefit concert on 125th Street in Harlem. He wanted to show his people that he was still the same kid who had played in the backing bands of Little Richard and the Isley Brothers. He wanted to bring the Electric Church home. The atmosphere that day was not the blissed-out, flower-wearing vibe of Woodstock. It was a pressure cooker. The Sea Pantherler, Black Panthers, stood in the crowd with their arms crossed, their berets tilted low over their eyes. They didn't see a genius, they saw a puppet. When Jimi took the stage, the hostility was palpable. "Take off that clown suit," someone screamed, referring to his flamboyant psychedelic gear. A glass bottle shattered against his amplifier. An egg hit the stage near his feet. Jimi tried to play. He poured his heart into the blues, trying to find that common frequency. But the audience wanted a beat they could march to, they didn't want a white man's guitar solo. He was heckled off his own stage in his own neighborhood. After the show, a group of militants cornered him in the dressing room. "Why are you playing for the white man, Jimi? Why are you keeping those white boys in your band? You're a house N asterisk 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 for the hippies." Jimi was devastated. He was a pacifist by nature, a man who believed in the universal family. He didn't care that Mitch Mitchell was white, he cared that Mitch Mitchell was a hell of a drummer. But the political climate of 1969 didn't allow for nuance. You were either with the revolution, or you were the enemy. This internal exile was the cruelest cut of all. It forced him to disband the Experience and form the Band of Gypsies, not because he wanted to fire Mitch and Noel, but because he felt he had to prove his blackness to a world that was threatening to erase him. As if the racial and social exile wasn't enough, Jimi was also a prisoner of his own success. His manager, Michael Jeffrey, was a shadowy figure with alleged ties to British intelligence, MI6, and the Mafia. Jeffrey didn't view Jimi as a man, he viewed him as a product with a limited shelf life. While Jimi was generating millions of dollars in revenue, he was often broke. Jeffrey funneled the money into offshore accounts in the Bahamas, leaving Jimi to beg for cash to buy guitar strings or a new jacket. This was a modern slavery. Jimi was the most famous man on earth, yet he was a sharecropper on his own plantation. This is the detail that truly chills the bone for those who look deep into the Hendrix archive. Shortly before Jimi's death in 1970, Jeffrey took out a $2 million life insurance policy on Jimi. In the cold world of the music business, Jimi was worth more dead than alive. Alive, he was becoming difficult, he wanted to play jazz, he wanted to record 20-minute experimental tracks, he wanted to fire Jeffrey. Dead, he was a static, marketable icon whose records would sell forever. The kidnapping incident in New York, which we discussed previously, was a part of this control tactic. Jeffrey wanted Jimi to feel that the world was too dangerous for him to survive without a protector. It was a psychological prison that mirrored the literal segregation he faced in the South. Jimi was being squeezed from every side, socially, racially, and economically. The culmination of all this pain, the Alabama diner, the London exoticism, the Harlem rejection, and the economic chains, found its way into a single performance, Machine Gun, at the Fillmore East on New Year's Eve, 1969. For the 60-plus generation, Machine Gun is the definitive document of the decade's end. It wasn't just a song, it was an 12-minute sonic exorcism. Jimi took the Stratocaster and turned it into a mirror of the American soul. He used the Univibe pedal to create a swirling, nauseating atmosphere of dread. Then, he used the feedback to simulate the sound of air raid sirens. He hit the strings with the side of his hand to mimic the rat-a-tat-tat of an M60 machine gun in a Vietnam jungle. But if you listen closely to the recording, you realize he isn't just playing about the war in Vietnam. He is playing about the war in the streets. He is playing about the glass bottle shattering in Harlem. He is playing about the man at the diner door. When he sang, "Evil man make me kill you. Evil man make you kill me," he was talking about the systemic hatred that turns humans into machines. He was crying out for a world where he didn't have to be a double exile. The guitar solo in Machine Gun is not music, it is a human being screaming through 6 steel strings. It is the sound of a man who has realized that the peace and love generation has failed him. By 1970, Jimi Hendrix was exhausted. He was 27 years old, but his eyes in the final photos look like they belonged to a man of 80. He had lived 3 lifetimes in 4 years. He was tired of being the wild man. He was tired of being the Uncle Tom. He was tired of being the money machine. He retreated further into his Electric Lady studio, a space he designed to look like a spaceship. He was obsessed with the idea of 1983. A merman I should turn to be. In that song, he describes fleeing a world destroyed by war and hate to live under the sea. So my giant peace frog and I will bid you all a very sweet goodbye we're going to be under the sea not to the power and the glory but to a world of harmony. This wasn't a drug trip. It was a man begging for an exit. He had realized that neither the land of his birth nor the land of his fame would ever truly see him. He was a citizen of the universe, a traveler who had stopped by for a moment to show us what the future could sound like, only to realize that we were still stuck in the past. Jimi Hendrix died in London on September 18, 1970. The moment he was gone, the double exile ended, but in the most cynical way possible. The white rock press, which had treated him as a freak show, suddenly sainted him as the god of rock. The black community, which had called him a traitor, eventually reclaimed him as the father of funk. Suddenly, everyone loved Jimi because a dead Jimi was safe. A dead Jimi couldn't ask for a sandwich in a whites-only diner. A dead Jimi couldn't refuse to be a political pawn. For the 60-plus audience who remembers the real Jimi, the shy kid who played the blues with his teeth because he was too nervous to look the crowd in the eye. The story is a tragedy of missed opportunities. We had the greatest genius of the 20th century in our midst, and we spent his entire career trying to put him in a box. Today, when you listen to the feedback of The Star-Spangled Banner, or the mournful slides of Villanova Junction, you are listening to the sound of a man who was looking for a home he never found on this planet. He was the third stone from the sun, a visitor who saw the beauty of our world, felt the heat of our hate, and decided his work here was done. He didn't just play the guitar. He lived the struggle of every person who has ever felt like an outsider. He turned his exile into electricity, and in doing so, he gave us a glimpse of a world where the only thing that matters is the vibration of the soul. The Marshall stacks are cold now, and the white Stratocaster is behind glass in a museum. But the echo of that double exile remains, a reminder that the most dangerous thing you can do in a world of black and white is to live your life in a brilliant, electric, and uncompromising shade of purple.